welcome everybody to our Sacred Self-Healing Emotional Processing Energy Training Call. This is Jona Bryndis. You guys all know me. And I am very excited to have you guys all here. We have some cool exercises here today. And I've also received questions already. And these workshops here for you, Sacred Self-Healing members, they are there for you to really ask questions and share. So please don't see this as a lecture. I do truth talks and explainer videos, and there's a lot of things that I explain there. And yes, there is an explaining part here as well, but it's really important for you to ask questions here. This is progressing technology and so forth. We have way less activity in the forum, actually almost zero now, because we have these daily free meditations on Skype. We have lots of training videos. There's over 200 training videos in the forum for you guys, workshops and training calls for the sacred self-healing steps and so forth. So yeah, emotional processing. We talk so much about this. I think we all use this word emotions or feeling several times a day. And if we are energetically sensitive or even empathic, we probably use it even more often. And so the part of emotional processing is to become more aware of what we actually feel and what we describe as emotion, or how we describe our emotions. And I want to just upfront make a quick distinction here that processing our emotions is not the same as emotional processing. All right, I know this may sound a little confusing right now, but processing our emotions means, that we are aware of our emotions, that we can express them, we can regulate them, we can own them, we can integrate them, and resolve them. All right, this is really what processing our emotions means. And whenever we process our emotions, which is a very normal human daily part of our metabolism, actually a combination of physiological, cognitive, and behavioral responses here, as it is defined sort of in psychology, meaning that there's a lot to this. It's not just sort of a feeling or a sensation or a thought. It is all of this together. And this is one of the things, guys, that have really riddled humans for as long as there is sort of this higher cognitive function for us, right? What are emotions? And what comes first? Do we have a physical sensation? And does that sensation or that physiological process, say our nervous system or our hormones or neurotransmitters, then produce an emotion? Or do we have the emotion first and then our body responds to it? Is there any kind of cognitive always means sort of mental, intellectual function involved in this? Okay, we can have the same sensations for different emotions, right? Our heart can race out of excitement, out of fear, out of shock, okay, but also out of, being sort of super elated and blissed out. This can all have similar physiological symptoms, and yet the way we feel from within is completely different. Now, do we cry because we're sad, or are we sad because we're crying? I want to throw this at you here because there's quite a few different theories on how emotions are being sort of perceived about emotional processing. And if you've been to any other training before, then we have covered a lot of things already in regards to how different people tend to have a different preference as they perceive their feelings. Some of us will tend to be more tactile about it and pay more attention to the sensations, and perhaps then some of us will pay more attention to the behavior that comes with it, how we act this out. We have different sort of ways of seeing and perceiving and interpreting our emotions. And I wanted to ask you here what your thoughts are. I would love it if you shared, guys. Yes, Cindy's already sharing. She says it can go both ways, right? If I pick up something collective, it can be a sensation first and then an emotion. And if it's my own stuff, then the emotion can come first. Oh, this is interesting, Cindy. This is interesting. This tells me that you have already sort of reflected about your emotions. So you are noticing a difference. So can you elaborate on this just a little bit, Cindy? So you have obviously different ways of feeling things coming in. So you say that if it is your own stuff, then your emotions tend to come first. If it is something collective, and what I read from this is what you mean with collective is what comes in from the outside, something external, then you feel it more as a sensation. And then comes an emotion. Your mic is off. Hang on. Oh, sorry. Some of you guys still have muted microphones. Yours is on, Cindy, from my end.
Ah, there we are.
Yes. Hi, Cindy.
Hi.
This is a cool observation. Would you share some more? I think a lot of us here as energetically sensitives in one way or another are interested in what you just shared with us.
Yeah, before I started working with my sensitivity, I always just assumed it was my own, that everything was my own. Whether it was, the sensation that came first or the emotion, I just always assumed that it was mine. But once I learned to distinguish between what was coming in from the outside, which sometimes can be, it's usually a sensation first. And then an emotion will follow. I think that's that 6-second rule before, you can have it latch on to your own triggers. Or even, sometimes I get an emotion that isn't even mine, that's always fun.
Let me ask the others here real quick. Who of you, as energetically sensitive, has experienced something like, let's just call it picking up on an emotion and not, while not being entirely sure if it is yours or maybe somebody else's, or maybe something coming in through collective energies or through, let's say, the workplace that you're at or the family that you're with? Who of you has observed some kind of confusion there at times, like where we're not really sure what it is that you're actually picking up on? I mean, obviously the descriptor or how you describe what you experience, that's a whole different question, but just simply the discernment of whether it's your own or whether it's somebody else's or coming in from the outside. This is more than half of you, actually, probably more like 75% often. Yes, Justine. You've had this for the longest time, Denise, until just recently. Yes, this is, I think, if I look back at the history of the sacred self-healing community and everything that I've learned as an energy coach, I think this is one of the first sort of really healing insights, is that not all of what we sense, of what we feel, of what we emote, and even what we think isn't necessarily ours. So this can be quite healing to hear this, also, of course, especially when other people share what they're feeling and you're like, yeah, I feel the same thing. This is why we have so many groups, forums and so forth, where people can share. And you used to really hate that about yourself, Heather. How do you mean that? The fact that you were not able to discern, or the fact that you kept on feeling other people's emotions or the sensations, perhaps the latter, that you constantly picked up on energies or emotions around you? You'd get upset. It would upset you that you felt other people's emotions. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, this is actually quite typical amongst people who are energetically sensitive and not trained in this. They feel kind of like it's a curse. It's almost like you are so exposed and vulnerable, and other people often not aware of this at all, but you feel very much alone with this. I think that's one of these hallmarks of sort of untrained, unprocessed energetic sensitivity, right? And let me just make a quick distinction here between energetic sensitivity and empathy. Who of you sees themselves as empathetic? The distinction is energetic sensitivity encompasses sort of just undifferentiated, sort of picking up on energies. This can be anything: visual, auditory, physiologically, emotionally, feeling wise, but it can also be, and this is what the empath qualifies as particularly intense, the emotions, like responding particularly strong to other people's emotions. Who of you can sort of report or see this about themselves, that they are probably empathic? Like energetically sensitive, or all of you here, you wouldn't be here if you weren't energetically sensitive. But who of you thinks that you are particularly sensitive to other people's or emotions altogether? Cindy, big hand up. Yeah. So particularly the emotions. Yeah, that's a few. That's a little less than the previous answer. So roughly half of you. Yes. Now, yes. So Janet says, it seems I'm very energetically sensitive, and perhaps I've been an empath all my life without realizing. I was just going to say that, Janet. Just because we don't identify this within ourselves doesn't necessarily mean that. But I also want to sort of demystify the word empath. Okay, there's nothing special about being an empath. As a matter of fact, and we're not going to go into this today, but being an empath is actually kind of like a trauma response, guys. So it's a coping mechanism that we have developed, most likely out of the necessity to to cope, to better manage our energetic sensitivity. So not everybody experiences this in a sort of this strong emotional way, but that doesn't mean that we are not, or that we are. So being an empath is not actually a good label. All right. When it comes to psychology, it is more of a dysregulation, to be honest with you guys. But when I see this here from an energetic point of view, then I can see that there is something like a specialization on energetic energy. So all empaths are energetically sensitives, but not all energetically sensitives are empaths. All right. So I just wanted to just increase your distinction here. Yeah. Yeah, and Janet, you're bringing up a good point. Not knowing what is normal, and that's why and not to confuse you guys, but that's why I wanted to bring in a bit more discernment here, because when you pick up on something empathetically, it is really feeling wise, okay? And this can encompass your body, this can encompass your thinking, this can encompass your whole being, okay? But typically empaths, have a tendency to respond stronger to emotions. There is a stronger trigger there. all energetically sensitives will pick up on outer energies, but you know, some will, you know, notice emotions of other people, but don't necessarily suffer from it, if you know what I mean. It's so there's the empath is more sort of the one that suffers particularly from this energetic sensitivity, and it plays out in the emotional processing. Okay, so I do want to just send this as a disclaimer. It's neither good nor bad, guys, but one of the things that come through this, and this is the beautiful thing here, is for those of us who, along with their energetic sensitivity and empathy, also feel higher levels of compassion for other people, which is the beautiful thing. So true empathy, you know, really causes us to go into a much more understanding and forgiving and loving and compassionate place, right? It facilitates to open our hearts and to stand in our hearts and really see other people from this heart perspective, that it can be a very good or like say preemptive almost or invitation to wanting to be of service, wanting to help other people. So we see clearly a correlation here between empathy, energetic sensitivity, people wanting to be of service, wanting to be in some kind of healing or supporting or sort of service to others kind of position. So if I made it sound like empathy is a mental disease, forgive me here. I just really wanted to bring in the counter point, all right, that you know, so that we can neutralize some of these new age myths, you know, that empathy somehow makes a person special. That is actually not the case. Empathy brings in, and being empathetic brings in a specific challenge for a person, namely the need to learn to discern emotions better and to become more aware of their emotional processing. So it forces the person to do that. It becomes instrumental. Without that, we become, yeah, what? We become victims of our own emotional perceptions, be it through, you know, emotions that came in from the outside or from the inside, is irrelevant at that point. When our emotion handle us, we cannot handle them anymore. And so we find a lot of need for emotional processing or for improved emotional processing amongst energetically sensitive and empathic people. Now, being an empath, you can hear that it's a slightly different thing than being empathetic, okay? And true empathy, guys, true empathy from an energetic point of view is basically sort of an idealized version of being able to connect with the other and the world, including myself, without any judgment or any preoccupation whatsoever. From an energetic point of view, true empathy is sort of associated with a true non-sacrificial but true selflessness and unconditionality. All right, this is where we interact with our environment, where we relate with our environment from a point of view, from a level of consciousness that allows us to let all these emotions, all these energies, and everything that is around us, you know, go through us and feel them and, you know, be aware of them and acknowledge them, but not necessarily becoming overwhelmed or controlled by them. All right. So through this slightly idealized version here, that we recognize that, you know, whether you call yourself an empath or not, doesn't really matter. If you have a lot of unprocessed emotions in you, then you have a certain tendency, okay, to needing to cope with that. And I've mentioned earlier that, the empathy itself, or being empathetic, can be part of this coping mechanism. All right. We've handled that, or we discussed that in other webinars and other trainings. For example, the emotional maturity workshop, which I would strongly recommend to you to revisit here in this context, because there, we recognize what we even use this for. What do we use our energetic sensitivity, our empathy for, and are we misusing it? Okay, and when we misuse our energetic sensitivity, our empathy, then we can be sure that we are still in the middle of coping with something. So that is not the same as being, healed or emotionally processed. So let's look into what happens to emotion when they are not properly processed, meaning when they somehow get stuck in us. And from an energetic point of view, we're not just looking at the emotion or how the emotion would be described or how psychology would see it. We're looking actually at the energy of that emotion. And when that it doesn't get properly metabolized, and you can really visualize here food, that doesn't get properly processed, properly metabolized, what happens with it? Okay, so for the most part, our metabolism is so optimized that it takes out what it needs from these foods that we eat every day, and it uses some of them as building blocks and some of them as engine, and fuel. All right, and some of them are being stored, for later use. And this is the same with our emotions. So we have different processes, obviously, when we get a signal, when we have a stimulus, right? We have something that we perceive here, and this is often, for most people, it is often in the sensing first. So there's some kind of very faint, doesn't always have to be we are not always able to pinpoint this, but there's something physiological that happens. Okay, we get tense, or we feel some kind of feeling in the gut, or suddenly things contract in us, okay, in some ways. That is sort of the sensation, the sensing level of perception. And then we can do two things. We can either interpret that and decide what kind of emotion we want to have, or we immediately have an emotion, and then the brain interprets what this emotion is about and whether or not it likes it or not. And so we form sort of different ways of processing depending on, depending on our likes and dislikes. All right, or whether something is a good or positive or a negative emotion. And here I would like to just point out real quick that from an energetic point of view, guys, there are no good or bad emotions. There are only emotions. And good or bad is a mental interpretation. Okay, and that depends on what? That depends on our past, on our experiences, on our memory of that emotion, and it depends on ways how we've been conditioned or raised, what we were told is right or wrong or good or bad, where perhaps punished for certain things. So we had certain consequences for feeling or expressing certain things, or we've experienced others, either getting punished or getting in trouble or whatever for expressing or acting in a certain way. So you see, there's this physiological aspect, there is this emotional aspect, then there's the cognitive aspect, sort of what we think about it, our beliefs and our mindset about it, and then there is the behavioral, how we act, how we handle it, how we handle our emotions. So for your self-assessment here, I wanted to just give you a very quick overview of what these signs are of unprocessed emotions in us, and why is it so important to pay a little attention to this. Because, and this doesn't matter how aware you are and how enlightened you are, or how energetically sensitive, or how empathetic, or whatever you are, it doesn't matter at all. If you have unprocessed emotions, that means they're getting stored somewhere, just like in your body. If you have unprocessed foods in your system, okay, then it needs to get stored somewhere. The body needs to do something with it. It's the same with energies. Energies don't just poof away. It's got to go somewhere, okay? And obviously, in our physiology, we have our different systems, and our digestive system, for instance, the main function actually next to absorbing nutrients and fuel is actually the elimination, eliminating what it doesn't need. This is particularly important in regards to dieting and in regards to the health of certain foods, because if there's too many contaminants or poisons or toxins in the food, then the nutritional value or the fuel value of food that may be insignificant compared to how hard it actually is for the body to release it, to let it go, to eliminate it. Okay, so in other words, it is obvious to us in say with substances, with poisons, that if we keep putting poisons into our body, be it through drugs, through alcohol, nicotine, but even sugar is regarded as a toxin, opioids and so forth. It doesn't matter really, or even plant medicines, really represent poisons, because you can't take them in unlimited doses. So they can be deadly if you take too much. So if we keep exposing ourselves to this, or if we keep putting this into our body, then the logic tells us, common sense that we have, that something's got to give at some point, right? Either the liver, or the parts of our system that have to do with the gallbladder and so forth, that have to do with filtering and taking all the toxins out and eliminating. They get sort of overstimulated. They get they get a little exhausted through this. And the same happens with emotions, guys. So if emotions are unprocessed, if they stay in our system, or if we don't, if we can't process them, or if we don't process them, if we control them, or if we don't let them out, or if we don't acknowledge them, if we don't even allow us to feel them, all right, then something's got to give. It's got to go somewhere, okay? And obviously the whole entire psychology sort of deals with that, namely, the mental health aspect of that. So if we have too much unprocessed emotions stored in us, it can lead to physiological actual diseases. It can lead to all kinds of mental disorders, or even illnesses. And we know this here as energy healers, it can lead to severe spiritual crisis. Okay, so emotion processing is extremely important for our, say, sort of energetic health and balance. And these are here examples for signs of unprocessed emotions. Intrusive thoughts, not allowing emotions, or hyper emotionality. So often you'll see it's sort of either or, the extremes. Self-soothing, controlling emotions. Here, for instance, addictions can play a role. Repeatedly experiencing the same emotions, powerful, intense, or big emotions, or the fear thereof. Avoiding stimuli that trigger emotions, meaning sort of self-deprivation. Outbursts, venting of emotions. a low tolerance of emotions, either within ourselves or in other people, a lack of discernment, okay, where people, over time get sort of numb towards their own emotions, that they no longer really that they're no longer to discern them. They're just really living their life with like 2 or 3 states, and that is good or bad or so, something along those lines. So the emotional descriptors, they reduce over time, and with those emotional descriptors falling away, the inability to describe and to feel what we're feeling, we are becoming number and number. So this can be part of our coping mechanisms, but this can also be part of an unconscious or conditioned behavior. Yes, and Heather, you were bringing a good point in here. Having been punished for being too sensitive. Yeah, this is the problem with sensitivity, right? Sensitivity is often perceived as sort of sensitivity in the sense of vulnerability, okay, or sensibility. So we got to learn how to regulate our emotions better if we want to prevent sort of these unprocessed emotions to store in our systems, be it again our physiological or emotional or energetic or even sort of cognitive, mental, intellectual states. If we want to prevent that from getting stored there, and for that we need to learn how to regulate our emotions. So for this here, just to bring this, back into memory, because we talk about this in so many different ways, is, and those of you who have done energy coaching with me or any kind of training programs, you know this, that it always starts with discerning emotions. This is something that most people are completely unaware of. The difference between their emotions, their sensations, their thoughts, and their feelings. I remember a time where I could not differentiate this. The only way I could describe how I felt was I felt like shit or it's okay. This is how I would have felt myself when I was about 20 years old. Those were the only 2 states that I knew about myself. I would not be able to see a difference between my body and what if my body felt tired, if my body felt uncomfortable, or if it was coming from my emotions, or if there was something really bothering me mentally. I would not know the difference, and I would definitely not really know the difference between emoting and feeling. I've had a lot of sensations. I've had a lot of visions. As a child growing up, I had to literally, I was not only punished like you, Heather, for being too sensitive. I literally, I felt punished for being so sensitive, because I could, what I saw, what I, like when I closed my eyes, when I dreamt, was I was unable to process any of this because it was extremely gory, extremely violent, had nothing to do with my daily life, so to speak, and it felt like I mean, I didn't think I was crazy, but I thought that that this is like a burden. Okay, this like a burden. It feels like sort of a punishment, and therefore, I should make this go away. I should make all of this go away. All the emoting, all the sensing, all the thinking, all the feeling, just make it all go away. Who can relate to that? Who has had something similar? Like, just make it all go away. Yeah. Oh, yeah, guys. That's almost 70% of you, yeah. Yeah, and so we develop something, right? Something to process that. You know, if it was our physiological or digestive system, right? Um, you know, not wanting to feel anything, not processing anything is kind of like constipation. Okay, it's like you just absorb everything and you don't let anything out. You don't look, you just take it, put it somewhere, compartmentalize somehow, put a lid on and bury it somewhere. Yes, or like yes, Cindy, or you completely dissociate from it. It's like, well, this isn't me. This has nothing to do with me, right? So where we get sort of cut ourselves off from what we're experiencing. Yeah. And Heather's sharing, I still try that now and then. I feel lonely. That feeling triggers me to want to stop being who I am. You see already, this is severe, Heather, you know, and you're not alone in this. So I'm just telling you this here just to bring this into everybody's awareness, okay? How far this can go. It makes us stop wanting to be who we are. Yeah, it's huge. Yes, when it's too much. Yeah. So what do we do? You know, yeah. To regulate our emotions, you know, we need to somehow, you know, work with these states. If we don't work with them at all, obviously, then we're not really good at regulating them. So in psychology, they talk about dysregulated emotions or dysregulated emotional expressions. That is the way we express them to the outside. We resist or prevent feeling altogether. We judge our emotions, we vent our emotions, or you know, we avoid any kind of stimuli. This is actually more severe than I uh, at first realized. You know how um, we actually prevent ourselves from feeling. We get so tired from feeling, and this has nothing to do with being an empath or not. It is very common amongst energetically sensitives, but again, moving away from all these labels, um, it's just really exhausting. It's just a normal sort of human ego response, okay? We just don't want to deal with it, okay? Remember, egos, sort of prime directives are, you know, avoiding pain or seeking pleasure. And if dealing with your emotions is something painful, well, then you already know what your ego is going to choose, right? And if your ego is in charge, and what I mean with ego really is the culmination of all and developing, especially those of us who have sort of a spiritual impulse, who feel this inner yearning, this, you know, sort of seeking of higher expression. Um, we all, you know, just due to the normal evolutionary maturing process, we will process some of these things and become aware of bits and pieces of it. But there still are, and this is then something you see often later in people, there still are signs of sort of chronically unprocessed emotions. And, you know, the Western medicine is just now sort of starting to really open up for that. But, you know, things such as these mystery diseases and autoimmune diseases, fibromyalgia, MS, um, even allergies, celiac, Crohn's disease, and so forth. Those are all diseases that don't seem to actually have a physical cause. All right, and it's pretty clear. I mean, this is not new to those of us who are studying healing or who are interested in in those kind of healing arts, that there is a connection there. But this is not yet acknowledged really in the Western medicine. Just now, really, studies that are being made that actually show the connections here. Okay, so but in addiction, in recovery, it's obvious that this is part of or sign of unprocessed emotion. And of course, treating depression and anxiety, we can imagine this. And even with spiritual crisis, because for most of us, our spiritual emergence comes with a spiritual emergency, right? Who of you has yes, Abigail sharing, the numbness stops me from communicating. It creates a mental block. Yes, and we know there's some energy healing, Abigail, that the mental block is probably just sort of the second or third one in a row. It's an actual energetic block. And then, all the parts that are needed to bring this into a higher expression, or say more processed version, right? They're just not accessible for us. Now, here is one of the reasons, perhaps, and again, this is sort of hinting at this retrocausality, why we tend to have this notion or this attraction towards healing. The interesting part about this is that when we become healers, we have access to that again. And so as we are helping others, it can often also have this self-healing effect that we then remember this part of our inner processing and, become, more confident, more, develop more self-esteem, to process our own emotions. So this is just a cool little thing here on the side, that these unconscious blocks and sabotage mechanisms that we have, that we can surprisingly access certain aspects or skill sets for others, just not for ourselves. And that's then when psychology comes back in and says, okay, there's behavioral issues with this, here, such as codependency and so forth, where the person decides, to prioritize, say, the needs of others. And it's at some point it becomes very difficult to say what was there first, the chicken or the egg. Okay, was it that I was surrounded by people who were very demanding and who conditioned me in this way, that I had to prioritize, processing their emotions or working towards their needs, maybe because it wasn't safe if they were like say very angry, or if they were in certain moods, or if I got punished if I didn't quote unquote make them happy? Or was it that I was so energetically sensitive, okay, that I was just so overwhelmed I had no other choice, okay, than to, or I couldn't even discern whether it was mine or other people's needs. uh, I'm saying this on purpose here to keep your guys' minds open, and to not judge all these things too much in either way. Okay, so behavioral habits, so to speak, behavioral consequences of some of these things that you've described, the exhaustion and so forth, okay, is all belongs into the category of coping. Okay, so yes, there always is something that where you can lead it back to, but you got to be very careful with judging it, because it's often not the way it seems. It's easy for us to say, oh yeah, my parents and my culture and religion and da 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 conditioned me to. Yes, this is correct. We know there's conditioning in these early developmental stages, is basically like core programming for all of us. But there's also other parts, there's choices in there, and so and there's karmic components in all of this as well. So then in the course of our life we attract a counterpart, and this is why so many empaths end up with narcissists. There's so much to this, guys. It's very, very rich and very complex, and it's not very sophisticated, to create this good or bad or right or wrong dualistic sort of view about things, like that's the only way and everything else is bad or something like this. So it becomes really complex when you understand that narcissism and codependency are sort of in the same realm, and that they mirror another. Then you're starting to understand that what you judge as good or bad, or good emotion or bad emotion, or good behavior or bad behavior, I'd be careful with this. Yes, so you see here, incomplete emotional processing. The signs of that can be very complex: excessive control, OCD, suppression, numbness, unregulated or dysregulated. That those are psychological terms. Absorption is a big part of that, and I know that many of you suffer from absorption, emotional as well as energetic absorption, and of course then the whole big cluster of coping. So emotional processing, guys, this is not sort of advertising for emotional processing, but I really want to make it clear here for everybody that the processing of emotions always leads to healing. We just need to really find the right sort of balance of that, because there can also be an excessive or an over processing of emotions, which would then, I'd say, in my words, sort of lead to self-loathing, self-centeredness, where you just, excuse me, keep rehashing and revisiting your emotions, and it's all about your emotions. And if it's not about your emotions, it's about how you absorb all of these other people's emotions. So you see something here in this slightly sort of sarcastic way, how I'm seeing this, how I'm saying this. There are things, that, when we let the world derive our emotions, okay, and how others make us feel, and how collective energy is this, and da da da, and this, that at some point we are no longer able to actually relate to others or our world, okay, because we are too caught in this sort of own abyss, okay, of microscopically examining every single emotion and thought that we have. So we got to be careful there with this. So what is then called emotional processing? I told you I've lost some slides here. I'll probably find it after the webinar. In an ideal world, so I hope that I find them and then I can add them to the video. In an ideal world, the ideal emotional processing happens in these stages. And the first stage is, the awareness of the existence of an emotion, okay? That means, you have an experience of something going on. Let's say you feel sad. And you're not quite sure yet why, but you somehow feel heavy or you feel sad, and you observe that. Okay, so you can say to yourself, oh, I'm kind of feeling sad. Actually, a much better example maybe is anger. Many of you have reported, or not particularly you per se, but members of the Sacred Self-Healing community, that lately you've been experiencing something like an anger energy in you. Is this something that some of you can relate to? Like just sort of feeling an emotion in you, but it's not, it's more like you feel the energy of it, but not so much, you're not angry. You have no reason to be angry, but you're feeling the energy of that. So this is because you're energetically sensitive. Yes, thank you guys for confirming this for me. And you hear this already by the way I describe this. Yes, and most of you are already trained well enough to recognize this, correct, Cindy, that this is actually kind of coming in from the outside. All right. And yes, Abigail, I agree with you. And even I have perceived this. There's even a rage component that comes with this. So it's not just anger, it's like a rage. And it's very unusual for many of us, especially the women amongst us, because anger is typically one of those emotions that we as females, but you know, every males as well, but there's something gender specific about anger. It is typically considered to be a bad emotion for females. Okay, so we don't want to feel anger, and it's a very awkward feeling when you feel anger inside of you and you don't even know why, because there doesn't seem to be a reason for you to be angry. So this has something to do with picking up collective energies, correct? So you're picking up on something, but you, and this is why I described this, you know that it's not yours because you're not actually feeling the emotion, and you don't really have that sort of interpretation of it with it that makes it bad, or that makes you respond to this, or that makes you react to it. All you feel is maybe, I can only talk about myself. I felt the energetic sensation, so I know what the frequency of anger feels like. Then I felt the physical sensation, like literally my jaw clenching and my somehow being really tight, short fuse. Okay, so more sort of physiological. And then I was really sort of intolerant of a lot of things. I was intolerant of noise. I was intolerant of any kind of like sort of like the stuff here, you know what I'm talking about when you have kids, and there's a lot of like sort of tugging and pushing and pulling all day, and sort of feeling a real high level of intolerance for that. So knowing that these things are not mine, and even if they were, it'd be okay, so I don't have a judgment about it. It makes it easy for me to discern this. Now if we have a judgment about this, if we think it's bad to be angry, then what can happen to us when we pick up external energies, or emotional energies in particular, is that we start resisting them. Who have you felt this? Who have you felt anger and then immediately judged this, or yourself, okay, and try to make it go away? Try to make it go away. Like, this can't be, I can't be angry. I've got to I got to do something about this. I got to somehow either like whatever, go do some exercise, or do like immediately sort of go into this place where you try to make it go away. Yes, you had this with a sadness, Heather. That's very interesting. Can I come back to this later, or would you like to share about this here, because there's something specifically about each type of emotion and what happens when we don't acknowledge it, when we don't allow ourselves to feel it. Depending on which emotional energy it is. So with anger, it can, suppressed anger can lead to sadness in us, can lead to depression. Yeah. Okay, I will come back to this. Yes. So you guys all felt something like that. So there is the judgment of that. So ideal emotional processing is that we acknowledge that we feel that way. So, oh yeah, I'm feeling really angry right now, and we allow ourselves to feel it without resisting it, without judging it. We say, oh, that's interesting. And oftentimes we can also observe our behavior, something like an outburst or a venting or a purge even, like, oh, I've had enough, and just leave me alone, and I told you a million times, blah, 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 blah. Okay, some kind of just like wah, vent. um, and then of course it feels better. We released all this. That's the category of expressing. Ideal emotional processing doesn't judge the expression, it just really judges whether or not something is expressed. Okay, now if it's not expressed, um, then we're looking at the whole category of dysregulation, because if we do not express it, and eventually we have to allow an emotional release, then we have this sort of unhealthy situation that I mentioned earlier, where it's got to go somewhere. And it's typically over time, the older we get, the denser these stored emotional energies become, and the more physical they become. That's why we end up with these degenerative or sort of slowly progressing kind of sort of self-attacking kind of diseases, mystery diseases. The next step of ideal emotional processing then is to own them and to say, well, you know, I mean, I yelled at my son, and it was like it's literally like a 30-second thing. And then I realized what I was doing, and I joked about it. I said, "Oh my God, I just felt so angry, and I didn't even know why." And I apologize for yelling at you, because really that wasn't appropriate. What you did wasn't really that, it wasn't that bad. I'm really sorry for bursting out and yelling at you. That really wasn't your fault, but I did it, and I don't, it doesn't reflect how I actually feel. So this is what owning means. Owning means, to say, okay, yeah, I did that. This is, what I felt. This is what I did. But then the forgiving part is sort of the more mature uh, reflection. Then, recognizing that maybe we had a day where we were super tired or super hungry or hangry, or where things just compounded, and then towards the end of the day we couldn't take it anymore. That all that is okay. Forgiving is an important part of emotional processing, guys. Without that, we tend to go back to revisit it, or have a tendency to repress it more, because we don't want to feel the guilt, or the fear of punishment. So don't underestimate that. And the allowing the emotional release always needs to be part of it. So at some point it needs to be released. Good sort of regulation, emotional regulation, and due to complete emotional processing, can happen through things such as this conversation that I just modeled, or through writing things down, or drawing a picture, or going outside and maybe just reflecting on things, recognizing maybe that we need to release some of these energies in a physical way. So emotional release doesn't always have to happen in a verbal way, but if other people are involved, we somehow have to communicate this with others. If it's with ourselves, we can do many more things for as long as they are healthy in their expression. Denise is asking, with expressing, do you mean verbalizing or writing, even if it's just to oneself? Yes, so that's exactly what I just talked about. This is not important how we choose to do this, but there has to be a release in some way. That you can have a ritual, even you can do things like writing things down on a pain card or a pain leaf and then burn it in the fire, or um, say a prayer. The classic confession in the Catholic Church, guys, picks up on that, because when you, and there is a fundamental healing effect of confession. Okay, I do not want to underestimate that. It has to do with you naming it. So in that moment where you name an emotion, an experience, your observation, what you witnessed, you are allowing it to be released. It's like sort of a mini exorcism at that moment, because now that emotion can no longer dominate you. You are releasing it. Now, this doesn't always mean that you can 100% let go of it, but a release is, something that you very often experience in transmissions. We all in psychology, it's called catharsis. Okay, this can also be a spontaneous release. And then continued with this ideal emotional processing. Obviously, we then sort of integrate this or implement this in our real life. So if there was another person involved in, like, say, whatever the emotional outburst was, whatever, however we sort of say vented it or projected it or whatever, then we have to go and somehow set this right or implement this or apologize or something like that. So the integration is part of the emotional processing. Okay. And then resolving an emotion, is also part of emotional processing. So not all emotions that are released are also resolved. Okay, that is very important to recognize. Okay, so it is a lot of people have this idea that if they just constantly release things or clear things, or if it's even less differentiated, just vent things, okay, that then they're free of it. That is not the case. So Denise is asking a very interesting question here, namely, can we use anger to correct ourselves? So now I know what you are hinting at here, Denise, with the word correction. So you don't mean correct as in punishment. You mean correct as in make it better, as improve. There is from a psychological point of view, you will, of course, hear from psychologists that it's important to release anger and so forth, but the answer there will be more like, maybe not. Maybe anger is not a good way to correct or improve certain coping mechanisms. The energetic view, though, teaches us differently. That an energetic view teaches us that the state of anger, the energetic state of anger has more power, has more energy than, like, say, the state of anxiety or depression. And that for many people, the reason why they get stuck in anxiety, why they get stuck in depression, is because they're not allowing them anger. So yes, from an energetic point of view, Denise, one can use anger to break out, to break free from an entrapment, from a bind, from something like, say, even unhealthy situation. So here you can see why I say there is no bad or good emotions. It's not the anger's fault. The anger itself, like all emotions, are merely signals that your system sends you to show you something. Okay, when you are angry, with the exception that you would just sort of empathetically or energetically pick it up from the collective, then it is not necessarily yours to process it. It's just yours to really acknowledge, to allow yourself to feel it, to express it, and then to let it go. But if it is something that really, say, pisses you off because people keep disrespecting you, or people keep taking things away from you, or they disregard your boundaries, okay, then for many of us, and this is then here sort of where we move into the how can we do this better, how can we correct certain behavior or behavior patterns that we have, maybe not wait until we have to be angry about it, maybe do sort of energy management and more preemptive steps to not even get into that place that we absorb so much of that we have to be angry in order to break out of something. So this is a coping mechanism that I see a lot, especially amongst energetically sensitives and empaths, is sort of this absorb, explode. And what comes out of this as a habit and therefore coping mechanism is this sort of guilt in the end, because what we're actually trying to accomplish and what we're actually trying to do is an act of liberation, is an act of self-healing and heeding our inner signals, but we're not allowing ourselves to do this effectively, namely at the time when it was needed. We absorb too much, suck it up for too long, and then the way it comes out is too violent or too extreme, too intense. And this often leads to the other person not actually taking it seriously, so just thinking you're going through an episode or something, or like being so enraged by your anger that you end up in a fight, and where this original attempt to correct yourself or to improve something about your situation or to heal yourself, where that then sort of goes into the background. So if that did that answer your question, Denise? Janet is commenting here that this is a trendy thing, to use anger. Well, you have to look at this from a less cynical point of view, Janet. Most people, and especially the energetically sensitives and the quote-unquote spiritual people, they have this disease that they think that anger is unspiritual, or not, oh, you should just be nice to everybody and you should just send loving thoughts to everybody, and and just don't be angry because angry is not spiritual. What you call a trendy thing is something that is actually a good counter movement to this sort of sucking up, okay, because that has led to a whole entire phenomenon here with this empath narcissism stereotype of toxic relationship, because this new age spiritualism actually breeds that. It breeds this idea that we have to suck things up and that we have to be nice, and that we can't be angry because being angry is not spiritual. So in that way, it is maybe a trendy thing as sort of a counter movement. Obviously, it can be misused, just like all the emotions can be used or misused to manipulate other people, and that is through intimidation, or as you will see, through projection. Unprocessed emotions, they have to go somewhere, and they either attack yourself or they're being projected onto others if we don't resolve them. So it is important, no matter how at this moment, how we see our emotions, how we perceive them, and the mindset that's behind them, whether we believe that emotions are bad or good or whatever. Regardless of all of this, the bottom line is that we cannot heal what we cannot feel. Okay, the problem only with what we're feeling is that we're often not quite sure what we're actually feeling, and some of that you mentioned in the beginning, it's a lack of discernment in regards to what it actually is that we're picking up. Is it ours? Is it coming in from others or from the outside? And even if it is ours, or if we want to make it ours, and own it and so forth, do we even know what exactly it is and what is underneath, these feelings, okay, that we're feeling? So how we feel about our feelings. Okay, this is then, sort of the big sort of process here that starts, as we're allowing ourselves to really work, to really deal with our emotions, so the emotional processing. And, one of the first things that comes up, and that is probably the most important thing, is it has to do with our emotional literacy. And I talk a lot about this, and not just in regards to discernment of sensing, emoting, thinking, and feeling, and acting and behaving. We just talked through this. But mostly, and this is the part here that you really need to see, the capacity to even access our emotions. This is something that is extremely important, and I would love to talk about this here with you a little bit, because it really, determines the way we perceive our emotions here, the way we feel about our feelings. But that part is responsible for us really comprehending our emotional life, and therefore then helps us to really, engage in this improvement and this correction in this self-healing process. And at the beginning, of course, it is always sort of the distinction that helps us to increase our literacy, okay, to even become more aware of these differences. And we've talked about this a little bit in the beginning. But then, we'll see that there's also other components involved in this, namely, sort of all these things about our emotions, okay? So how we manage them, and how we express them, how we regulate them, how we, what kind of tolerance we have, how we respond to a certain intensity and so forth. That is sort of the main reason why many of you tend to spend quite a bit of time with emotional processing, because you need to develop a more sort of rarefied lexicon of inner sensations. And this is something here that I can only really recommend anybody working with emotional processing, instead of asking why, and sort of judging your emotions and spending all this energy, and trying to make them go away, not feel things or whatever. All right, I think it'd be much more effective here, and also preparing you for other sort of further evolutions or developments of that, namely emotional intelligence, and really sort of this self-esteem, the confidence to be able to regulate your own emotions, and then to really engage in a free and self-chosen type of empathy, where you don't need to protect yourselves from certain emotions, because you're not afraid, okay? You're not afraid of feeling your feelings, okay? And what you see here is just an example for all the different ways how we can describe things. So when we work with kids, we start out with like 6 to 8 basic emotions, and this is typically done with like smileys, to show people's sort of facial expressions, and then for you to describe how this person, or this smiley face, what this smiley face is expressing. There is a test that I will send with you here, an online test that you can do with the recording that tests how good you are at that. Facial expressions, nonverbal, to read nonverbal expressions. this has a lot to do with experience, also with age, but also, of course, with the authenticity level of people that you're with. But what is way more important here, and I think you've all experienced this, is the ability to even describe your own emotions. And when we talked about anger here, right? So let's look at this a little more. Okay. So most people, okay, so I've already talked about what happened when your emotional literacy gets reduced. What leads to a reduction of your emotional literacy? That is mostly all these things that we've discussed before. We feel overwhelmed by emotions, or we try to dissociate, we try to numb ourselves from emotions, and with it, over time, the descriptors also fall away. So the access to our emotions becomes more and more restricted. The main cause for this, obviously, you can imagine that, is trauma, especially something like complex trauma. So complex PTSD, CPTSD, as it's called, sort of chronic exposure. Okay, it's some kind of chronic abuse, be it overt or covert, be it through verbal, emotional, physical, sexual abuse. It makes no difference, but something that is going on here, for a long time, that is literally flying underneath our radar. Okay, that we have accepted as normal, that we have accepted as a sort of familiar toxicity. And that is then what leads to us more and more sort of shutting down our ability to discern. Now, I want to ask you guys here for a second. What are the most common, or how many emotional descriptors do you use? Not those of you here who are training with me to become an energy healer and heart warriors. You guys are in that training, but maybe you remember what was the range of emotions that you would use as descriptors when somebody asks you, hey, how are you feeling? How many do you think you would typically use? And this can be a better friend, not like sort of the cashier at the supermarket. So people who are, who are interested in how you're feeling. How many emotional descriptors would you use typically in your life, in your daily life? Okay, Cindy's making a few examples here. Tired, angry, hungry, lonely, happy. Okay, that's 5. Yeah. Good. Okay, fine. All right, Sucky, feel like maybe, like 4, maybe. Yep. Becky. Yeah, this is it's very common. Okay, so statistics show that we use between 6 to 8. That's absolutely correct, Sarah. Yeah. Sad, happy, depressed, disappointed, angry, excited. Yeah, so we don't really use that many. Now, obviously, if we have relationships, if we have people, where we have cultivated some kind of a deeper connection and a more intimate sort of exchange and expression, then, one single question, namely, oh, so how do you feel about that? Or how's this going for you? Or what is this doing for you, right? Would then encourage you to describe this a bit more. Here, as part of the many of our training programs, I really do this almost annually with people to motivate them to use more differentiated descriptors. I want to pick up here on this example of fear earlier. Sorry, anger earlier. Topsy-turvy, inside out, upside down, and backwards. Yeah, those are already verified emotional descriptors. And the English language is very good for sort of doing combinations and finding really cool adjectives, forming them. Actually, millennials are really good at creating new sort of very placative, very visual descriptors for emotional states. For anger, I learned to use, yes, Denise said for anger, you learned most of them in conjunction with the energy coaching. Yeah, because, when we have emotions that we judge as good or bad, and we have a sort of a dislike or feel resistance towards them, then we tend to like literally shut it down. We tend to wrap it up and put it away and just put a sort of a generalized label on things, and we don't investigate this any further because it's sort of no land. Okay, it's like it's poo poo. Okay, and anger is one of those very common, especially for females, as I've mentioned before. So let's look into this. Let's learn this here by example. The word anger, or the feeling, the emotion anger. Okay, let's take the last time you remember feeling angry. Who remembers? Who remembers the last time they were angry? Oh, yeah, some of you can get very, very poetic about it. Who wants to share? Who wants to share? Who wants to go through this real quick here with what you felt and, sort of going deeper into it? Who is willing to face their fear of anger
I
and
do.
to really, okay, come on, Denise. Okay, so the last time you were angry, or you felt the emotion anger, when was that?
Today.
Today. Okay, wonderful. No,
But
perfect.
it's part of the same.
Yes, no,
But
it's perfect. Yeah, probably, yeah. But let's not anticipate that. Okay, so you felt the emotion of anger today. Let's just go a little deeper into how did this feel? What kind of sensations came with this? How did you feel this in your body?
Yeah, first I felt sensations,
Okay,
like
sensations.
uh-huh, like in between my legs. I've been getting it there, so,
Okay.
and now, like, at the moment I feel that I know anger is coming up, like it's raw anger. So yeah.
Okay, so
um
let me just interpret this here for others.
mhm,
Okay,
mhm.
what you just said is something that somebody who becomes more aware of their emotion begins to become able to discern, namely uh, picking up certain emotions by the way they feel sensationally, like through the body, and more or less already picking up on the energies before the actual emotion. Cindy said something earlier as well, is actually sort of getting a foothold. All right, so what you just said is already differentiated. Let's try to keep it simple here, just for the sake of working through things. So you had physical sensations that kind of announced to you that anger is building, right? Did I understand this right?
Yeah, and it felt like an overwhelm, like it comes in as, overwhelm. So very raw. So it takes a
Raw.
few breaths. Yeah, a few breaths before I can distinguish the anger. Yeah,
So it comes like would you say like a wave almost?
yeah, yeah,
Like sort of whoa, overwhelming, right? It's like
yeah,
big. So it's
yeah,
intense. There's a high intensity
yeah,
of it.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, not all emotions necessarily come with high intensity. Does your sadness come with high intensity levels as well, or as in that way?
No, usually when I feel sadness is when I uncork the anger. Like the sadness comes more. It's more subtle, more hidden, or more. It's not as obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Yeah.
Yes. So this can be just on the side note here. The reason,
Mm.
or it can be a reason why people are more afraid of anger, because it typically comes with intensity, and it comes sort of as a wave, just exactly how you described this. So this feels uncomfortable. It feels uncomfortable for most of
Yeah.
us because we are somehow, regardless of the kind of emotion, but we are afraid of big emotions. We're afraid of this intensity. And anger typically, it doesn't have to be, but it typically comes sort of in this intense form to us. Why is that? Because until the last moment, we try to repress it, right? We try not to be angry because there's a part in us that kind of monitors, that supervises and says, not okay to be angry, all right? Until we can't hold it anymore. And then it overwhelms us. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Denise. So those were the sensations, and then what happened?
Well, then I felt that in my belly, and obviously it's outside of me, like there's a stress outside of me, and then I'm feeling stress inside too. If you,
Okay.
yeah,
So you said obviously, was this so clear for you at that very moment?
yeah, it was very clear. Yeah, I mean, it was very clear. When you're required to give more attention that you can give, and it just becomes really stressful, right? Like if you have a
Hmm.
baby crying and a toddler yelling, and it's just so many things going
Okay.
on at once, right? So yeah.
Was it particularly bad, or was it maybe that just your tolerance was lower?
I was a little tired today, so probably it was a combination of both.
Uh-huh.
Like yeah, yeah.
And that
The situation wasn't bad. It's not like it was, like the
chaos
external.
or
Yeah,
total
yeah,
disaster. It was just,
yeah.
it, okay. So, but it translated into anger. Do you have any other examples for a similar situation, but where it doesn't necessarily feel like anger? What is coming up?
Um, yeah, like I mean, I don't know. I guess the annoy part is kind of one
Uh-huh.
of the branches of anger.
Uh-huh.
That I can feel. Like I mean, and that's more subtle. Like it's not
Yeah.
as intense, but I can feel like annoy, or even uh, resentful, like kind of
Mm-hmm.
let down. So it's closer. It's closer. I guess it's closer on the will to fear. Like
Mm-hmm.
I might have an expectation, or I might have asked for something, and then I get a yes, and then a week later I get like, no, that's not possible, and then I'm already, you know what I mean? Like I have to adjust to that. So I guess I've been experiencing this, like this pink, angry, all the different layers, from feeling resentful to all the way of feeling dismissive. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like feeling provoked, feeling infuriated. That's a common one. But that's not
Mm-hmm.
like external situations. That's more like, what am I allowing? What am I signing in here for? It's more of a like checking in with myself. So,
Yeah. So let's.
today it
Yeah.
came in a few ranges, like different at different times on the day. It was different ranges.
Can you now? I mean, obviously, and you have
Mm.
already worked with this wheel, Denise, and you have already also seen how there's sort of transitions, right, where it can be mixtures of things. But just anger itself doesn't mean
Mhm.
a lot yet, right? Until we kind of qualify it a little bit more. These are just suggestions, guys. They've done a lot of research on this, and the typical human has a range of 34,000 emotions. Okay, and we typically use anywhere from 6 to 8 descriptors. So you can see that in our language, we're often limiting ourselves just through the lack of exercise, the lack of practice to actually express what this emotion is about. So we have to kind of make it a discipline with ourselves to describe things, to analyze this a little bit, not analyze as in mentally analyze, but actually feeling into it. You have to feel into it. Okay, you have to learn to allow yourself to feel in order to qualify, in order to name it, in order to identify it. All right, so in your case, the real life situation today, Denise, anger, came in a wave. And then if you had to use any of these sort of next level descriptors here in this a slightly more differentiated view, what would you say? Was it an anger that felt where it made you feel disrespected or let down or humiliated, or it made you feel bitter, or it made you feel really mad or enraged?
Today, specifically today,
Mm-hmm.
I felt bitter.
Okay.
I felt frustrated and then
Okay.
distant. I got distant to,
Okay.
like, you know what I mean? Like, it got to that point where I was like, I just need space and I'm just going to clear myself and I'm just going to center myself because otherwise I'm going to explode, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, so that's so this is very cool, okay? And you've already observed you're coping with it. So the distancing yourself is the way you chose to cope with it. Did it lead to any kind of critical situation today, or
No.
you were able to you know let it go that way? Okay,
Yeah,
distance
yeah.
yourself.
And then towards the end, I was I had to stay a little later than I was hoping for, you know. And then I
Uh-huh.
just went into respect. I was like, I'm going to respect myself and I'm going to grab my things and I'm going to be very respectful and just kind of like let them know it's my time and I'm going, you know what I mean?
Okay.
So, yeah. But I was already feeling the anger inside of me, you know. So I
Okay.
just sort of remember, okay, respect. Yeah.
So
But
this is actually very interesting because the anger had the sort of the quality of bitterness to it that somehow came from a frustration that you felt violated in some way. Okay. Now, when you work with little kids, uh, this this is their job, right? But of course, you do this professionally. You work as a professional nanny. You also have to deal with the parents, and there's a lot of boundary stuff that is going on. Obviously, you got family dynamics and so forth, but you are a professional, so you're hired for a specific time. And there was a point where you felt that it was very important for you to respect your time, and for that they to respect your time, that you express that you are firm on your boundaries, so that you wouldn't feel more violated.
yes,
Okay, so Denise,
yes.
this is an example for healthy regulation. Okay, your feelings of anger that came to you at first in a bit cringy way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, physical
Yes.
and a wave and intense, right? I mean, that's not something I've known you for a few years. You would have handled probably like that and a few years ago. Okay, so you notice that there's something that your system is signaling you that was making you frustrated, is making you bitter, and it made you pay more attention. It made you pay more attention, perhaps, and that's what I'm seeing here, what you're sharing, in regards to your own boundaries. Okay, because it violated you a little. It violated your boundaries just right there. It was nobody's fault, but it accumulates, right? If we don't actually say anything or do anything about it, then of course, we absorb it, and then it's just a matter of time until that then leads to sort of more intense versions of anger, right?
Right.
Where it
And,
turns where it turns aggressive and hostile, right? Where
and actually, I like to share. I got caught
hmm
up for like, a month or so, for a long time. I got caught up in the jealous, furious, which is like madness. Like
uh-huh.
I got caught up on that, like for like weeks at the time.
Okay.
And so,
hmm
sometimes like today, we've been working with this. Um, like constantly. So today was like easier, but like just recently, like I just went through a period where I just was like in the madness, which is furious and jealous, feeling that I was like spending my time not in a meaningful way. You know what I mean? So like that provoked,
and somehow like attacking your self-worth or something like that, where you felt sort of made inferior or something like that, where you felt like you know, where your pride maybe was kicking in as well, right?
yeah.
So you see here, the point of talking about real life situations is not to judge or not to make things right or wrong, but to look at healthy and unhealthy ways of processing our emotions. So if we can see, and this example here with you, Denise, was good for this, that the anger is just an emotion, okay, and then allow it to be there, acknowledge it, and ask ourselves, what is this actually about, and what is this informing me about? Yeah, what is the signal here? Okay, my system is responding to something. Now you, in your case, you could immediately relate it to your outside environment. Obviously this was a stressful environment that you were in at the time, right? So it was easy for you to say, okay, this is the noise level, or this is the kids are being like really difficult today, or whatever, you know, so you didn't have to identify with it, right? In your case, that was easy for you to identify, and therefore you could better see through this, you know, that this means to you that you have to be particularly careful now. You have to pay attention to your boundaries. Okay, if it goes too far, you know, it's kind of like a warning signal of your own system, right? This is like, okay, I'm getting like close to my to how much I'm willing to take, right? And if you can use the feeling of anger for that, Denise, to refer this back to your original question, can we use anger to correct or to uh, process this in a healthy way? Then the answer is absolutely yes, but only if we have the awareness, and if we can actually allow ourselves to feel and process these emotions uh, in the way that we know, or better know, or try to find out what it is truly about. You know, oftentimes we will see that, particularly with anger, it's about boundaries, it's about violation. Okay, either, you know, people taking things away from us, or knocking, you know, at uh, at at our boundaries, or disrespecting us, or something of this manner, and that we have to sort of make a stance here. We have to, you know, stand up for our boundaries. This is a sort of almost like a typical case. All of us, I suppose, know what happens if we don't stand up for ourselves, if we don't heed that signal, right? If we don't heed the signal to pay attention to our boundaries, what would have happened, Denise? And maybe you can answer this, because I know that personally
Yes.
you've had these situations a lot in the past. Let's
I
say
would I
in
would
your
have
old,
exploded, and then I would have gone into victimhood, and I wouldn't have like externalized my drama. You know, I would have made the
projected it all onto
family,
them.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like I would have projected and made them feel uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, I mean, everybody's going through a lot right now, so that wouldn't have helped them or helped me. And then I would have ended up in guilt, feeling bad, because, you know what I mean, feeling bad, and then
Mm-hmm.
remorse, you know, and then having to process
And
all
then
the
going
lower,
back in
yeah.
into next day, the
Yeah,
same situation, feeling guilty. Now you're sucking it up again because you feel so bad about what you did yesterday, right? So you feel like, oh,
yeah.
I should be more tolerant, right? You suck up, you suck up, you suck up until you can't take it anymore and you
And you
explode
explode
again.
again. Yeah.
Okay. I want to hear something here. Thank you, Denise, for
Thank
sharing
you.
this with us so openly. Who of you can relate to some of the process here that Denise shared in regards to these cycles with anger and guilt and sucking up and exploding, and, you know, who of you can relate to this? I mean, I can't, totally. Like clockwork, Cindy. Yes. Yep. Okay, guys, this is more than, oh my God, yeah, this is 80% of you guys. So thank you for for acknowledging this for yourself, because this is really advanced emotional processing, okay? That you recognize how all of this is related, how all of this relates with another. And Shri is asking here, or commenting here, and this would be the next example. I don't know, Shri, do you want to go through this here as an example, just like how we went through this with Denise? You don't have to. It's just like another nice example.
I mean, it was very similar, I think, to what she explained.
Which parts do you can you recognize as similar? Or
Well, for me, I
first,
think
let
it
us know.
was,
Yeah.
yeah, so I think I mentioned in the comment, it was a feeling of being taken advantage of, which
Mm-hmm.
made me feel angry. So it was a
Okay,
feeling of,
so that's
yeah.
your interpretation already, right? That's how you see it now. No, let's walk through it chronologically, if you can recall this. How did it start? Like, how did it come on? Did you have a sort of a sensation with it? Like, did your body respond to it, or were you caught in the emotion right away? How did this go for you?
I guess it was almost like getting ahead of myself, you know, almost like all the energy is rushing forward, like you're at a loss of words almost, because there's so much rushing in that you're not able to process anymore. It
Okay,
came
but
as a
the rush itself is already a really good descriptor. You
yeah.
know, like when things feel compressed
Hmm.
or too fast. Would
Yeah,
that describe it?
yeah, yeah.
Like it was just like stressful, really, right? Like,
Stressful.
yeah.
And it also rushes to the head, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that my eyes are squinting a bit, like, you know, the
Uh-huh.
eyebrows sort of frowning,
Tensing
and
up and frowning, yeah.
your eyes are starting to like really, almost as though you're, you know, a prey, looking at a prey almost, right? The hunter
Uh-huh.
mode. So yeah, something like that.
Okay, so you felt the tensing up, and
Tensing up,
the
yeah.
the subjective experience at that very moment was that you felt, well, you felt overwhelmed as well, but in this case, it was in your case, it was mostly sort of triggered by the pace,
Yeah.
if I hear it this way, yeah. And I know this really well, Sri, that pace can get to me as well. You know,
Yeah.
when things go too fast, it's like bombarding. It's like doom, doom, doom. You know, it's just like, wait a minute, wait a minute. Yeah, like you said, you can't even process anything. You know,
Yeah.
it's just like, but you all you want is to stop the machine for a second so
Yeah.
that you can, you know, begin to handle it. But how was the situation? Were you able to do that? Were you able to stop the machine, quote unquote, or did you feel sort of at that moment powerless to do that?
I did kind of feel a bit powerless.
Okay.
I actually felt a bit disrespected. I felt like boundaries are being violated, all of
Uh-huh.
that. Um, you know, but I think I also went into some acceptance. It came with an interaction with an individual, but I think I also went to a point where I was asking myself, how much of this is real and how much am I
Okay.
overreacting here? Um,
Okay. Yeah, this is a cognitive process. Let's put this aside for just for a second.
yeah.
Okay. Let's stick with just how it subjectively felt and how it came on, right? And how it felt for you. Okay, it
Hmm.
felt for you here. So, I mean, you already described a few things. You felt disrespected here, maybe
Yeah.
even betrayed or resentful into this direction, or more here into this direction, like violated, like
Yeah, I think violated was kind of the word. Like,
or hostile even, like where it felt that it was specifically sort of against you?
Yeah, I can't remember that specific now. I feel that I've been questioning that a bit more. So my cognitive part starts to come in
Mm-hmm.
quickly when I go to that place these days. You know, when it goes into, oh, it's me somehow. So
Yeah. Okay, so let's then address this, okay? Because by the physical sensations that you described, there's also a bit of a hint here, you know, how you tend to process it, namely through you said it rushes into your head, right? And
right.
your eyes are squinting. So this is showing sort of the place where these emotions are being processed,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So this hints at sort of some kind of cognitive or mental processing then at that point. That's fine. When it comes to the questioning, you know, first of all, I would suggest to you here that you don't generally question yourself. Okay, you can question whether you overreact or not. That's okay. So you can question your behavior, you can question your interpretation, you can question your perception, but
Hmm.
not yourself. Yeah, that's, you didn't say you did, but I just want to send this tip to all of you here that you really need to question what you're questioning,
Hmm.
and not to sound too mental, but it
Yeah,
if for many of us at that very moment it's hard to discern if we're actually questioning ourselves, because most of us end up questioning ourselves and our reality rather than, you know, say the perception of it or the interpretation or the behavior. Okay, it is quite possible that your perception of it was, you know, say skewed. And
hmm,
here is where the importance of emotional processing comes in, due to stored unprocessed emotions here. Namely, say a situation that repeats over and over again, right? If this, I assume this happened at your workplace, Shri, is that the
yeah. I
workplace
mean,
related thing?
you know, again, speaking of waves,
Mm-hmm.
there's the workplace part, but also I have this thing where I wake up and when you're, I'm sort of starting to become active, I
Mm-hmm.
notice that somehow anger comes in, like out of
Okay.
nowhere. Like I can't
Mm-hmm.
even figure out why is this anger coming in, but it's just once there's activity, you know, somehow this anger rushes in. So
That's
that's
interesting, actually. That's very good observation, because anger can, and this is the two-way aspect of this, anger can cause agitation, or agitation can cause anger.
mm,
All right. So this is actually a good observation in that way, because we sometimes have that hardwire. Okay, and it can go in both directions.
right,
That's that we become angry when we begin to physically somehow, you know, sort of translate it. It's like the machine starts really, the anger machine starts really getting sort of turned on,
yeah,
or it, you know, it just begins to release it. Okay, and this is the part that I want you from here on observe a little more closely. Which one is it? Okay, is it that the activity, as you describe it, that the activity actually causes the anger,
hmm,
or is it that the stored anger or the unprocessed anger causes the need for activity?
right,
Because it could be both.
yeah,
If you're not sure, it could be both. There's a lot of people here in this group who tend to be sort of hyperactive,
yeah,
you know, sort of trying to distract themselves with activity, okay, in order to process something that they're not aware of, okay, and not realizing how if they would process this emotion, underneath unprocessed emotions is always some kind of judgment or some kind of bad feeling. It's always something that we resist. Okay, we don't want to feel this, so we cope with it. We do something, either in order not to feel it or in order to release it somehow. Okay, and if we're not entirely sure, okay, why we're doing this. So if people, who have issues with pace, okay, with sort of stress, the fastness of things, we often actually, without being aware of this, produce life situations that are very fast paced. And you know what I mean? It's like it's completely unconscious, flies completely underneath our radar. You know how just because we're not wanting to deal with an emotion or some kind of subset of topics that belong to that subjective perception of the emotion, that we create a lot of activity, and then at some point that activity sort of hits us back, right? And it becomes too much, and then we become angry about the amount of activity, and then we blame it, we externalize it. We said, oh, why is this slow, why does this have to go so fast? And then of course it can trigger all kinds of other things, such as performance issues, because now we're feeling inadequate because we're not getting all the stuff done that we thought we could get done, or that we've opened up through this massive sort of amount of activity that we've done. And so we're moving in a self-perpetuating, almost self-sabotaging cycle here, without realizing that it's nobody's fault in that way. It's not necessarily our own fault, if you will. It is really just something that we cannot see. For those of you who have a tendency to feel overwhelmed by the pace of things, guys, and it seems kind of like a thing when I say it that way, but the best energy tip for you is to learn to slow down. And if you can't slow down, then you have to question that. What is holding me back from slowing down? Because if I have a habit of creating too much activity, okay, that then somehow leads to an unconscious processing, okay, to some kind of forced processing, all right, then I can never resolve it, literally never. It's like this endless cycle. Yeah, so whenever we have this feeling of sort of endless cycles, constantly repeating emotions, okay, where there doesn't seem to be a resolution, it's just day in, day out, sort of the same thing, that is a signal from your system that there is something not being processed properly. And the best way, when it comes with this subjective experience of overwhelm due to fast pace and stressful activity, is to stop the machine. Is to say, hang on, hang on, hang on. I need a timeout. Now, this timeout can, when you practice this here with mindfulness techniques and meditation and so forth, can consist of you sort of giving yourself sort of 10 seconds of a timeout, where you just sort of remember to breathe deeply, to slow down your own perception. And as you're slowing down your perception, you are then becoming more aware of sort of what is causing what, as opposed to just going or falling for the hardwired autopilot type of seeing things and interpreting things. So when we question our reaction, when we question our perception, the number one rule: never question yourself. Okay, yes, question your perception, question your pace, question your behavior, but not yourself. Okay, and in conjunction with sort of speed and pace, remind yourself to slow down.
Mhm.
You don't have to have a fix. You just need to slow down and allow yourself to let go. Behind not slowing down is this almost manic feeling that we have to stay in control. Okay? So the reason why we get so caught up in this unsolvable, endless cycle is because we're afraid that if we slow down, that things would get even more out of control. Can you relate to that?
Yes,
Right?
completely.
And it feels even more stressful, right? And that we need to question. We need to question the interpretation. Because I don't know, Shri, you or anybody else, did you guys have a positive experience with slowing down? Have you noticed that if things get too much, if you just sort of,
I
you
have.
know,
Yeah,
yeah?
I have. And I mean, even in this example, you know, I kind of noticed that with my slowing down, it actually, the people around me slowed down,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because it's almost as though I am trying to, I'm under this impression that I have to rush when actually maybe that's being perceived as other by others are perceiving it. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
okay, we need to rush. So you could essentially slow down and, you know,
Yeah, and
signal.
by the way, this is part of empathy, Shri.
Hmm.
Okay, empathy is a normal human skill set. Everybody is empathetic to a certain degree.
Right.
Okay, you know this famous example of yawning, right? One
Yeah.
starts to yawn, and then everybody sort of unconsciously starts to mirror this. The same happens with agitation. If
Hmm.
it only takes one person uh, to 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 act, to behave in a agitated or fast-paced way, for others to empathetically sort of,
Yeah.
change their behavior. In
Yeah.
work situations, to be honest with you, it's very difficult to determine what was there first, the chicken or the egg. Okay. Sometimes this can also uh, be the boss or just sort of the company culture that can create something like that.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's not always just us. In family situations, like I know in my family, I am the one that creates the agitation.
Mhm.
And between me and the kids, there was this fast-paced cycle that when I go in agitation, the kids are usually sort of more prone to respond empathetically, then they mirror this back to me, and then I get mad at them. And this questioning that you mentioned earlier helps me to see, like, wait a minute, they were actually just responding to me. So I can't get mad at them. That'd be unfair. What do they know, right? I need to slow down. And that's typically, and this is kind of like a mixture here of what Denise shared with us and what you're sharing. I had to recognize that this has a lot to do with boundaries, okay? Because the reason why I'm not slowing down is because I think I don't have the right to take a time out. I think I have to stay within this pace or else. And that's where you can question, your mindset, where you can say, well, or else what? Your kids are going to be mad at you, or they're not going to love you anymore, or they're going to, what's really going to happen? I mean, like, right, to really think that fear thought all the way to the end, right? The world's not going to go under. Okay, I'm still going to be alive if I take a time out. Obviously, I can't take a 2 months time out. I mean, I can, but then I can't expect uh, things to go smoothly. So, uh, you know, to recognize that a good emotional regulation and emotional and energetic management, that they're very strongly related. Okay. So for me to recognize, and that's why I asked you about this positive experience, right? You've noticed that if you slow down, others slow down. So there's a dynamic there. I don't know if you can relate to this too. I know many of you can relate to this, is that when you actually start slowing down, that things become easier, literally easier. Okay, you know, when I notice with myself that I go into like a physical or mental overdrive,
Yeah.
that I'm not very effective. You know, I run around a lot and blah, and everything is very intense and very intense, but my productivity is actually not very good. You know, it's not very high. And
Yeah.
so,
I
can
can
you relate
relate
to
to
that?
that. I can relate to that.
And this is literally, you know, in conjunction with reminding myself on taking a time out, breathing, slowing down. I also had to learn to communicate that and to not be afraid of that confrontation. You know, to insist on a boundary, to say, hang on, this is going too fast for me. I need a break. Yeah, I need to walk around the block, or you know, I need to meditate or something like that. So to go into this sort of self-regulation rather than in coping, you know, to find out what is it actually that I need right now, in order to, and that's then, you know, where we need to question what is it actually that we want or that we need, right? And then we go more into the accessing our own to processing rather than just coping. When we cope, we don't actually process. Coping is in and of itself really the attempt to not process, whether it's conscious or unconscious. Yeah, there's a lot of commentary here. Thank you so much,
Thank
Sri,
you. Thank you.
for sharing. And you guys see how fast this goes when we start talking about these things in a bit more detail. Yes, your timeout is going on. Oh, you're already, Heather. Yeah, you see this, yes. You all of you agree that when you slow down, it allows for other solutions and other options to come in. Yes, it's generally something that increases or expands our energy. Yeah. So slowing down is here in this workshop here, where we have to come to an end now for part one. Basically something that we've all now discovered as one of those very first fundamental self-healing things that we can do. We don't have to, you know, be an expert and everything. We probably all can use a little bit of training in our emotional literacy. But when we learn, or when we can slow down, everything becomes easier. You know, it becomes less intense. It becomes less stressful. Yeah. Yes. Very cool comments, guys. Thank you for your sharing. I hope that we can continue this year with you and with lots of sharing. You see, there's a lot of sort of things that unfold. Does anybody want to share here just real quick what you've taken from this? Is this helpful for you to really go through examples with your emotional processing and use these examples to talk through, you know, what is actually going on there, what we're seeing, what we're not seeing, what we should question? Yeah, is this helpful for you? Okay, then I don't have to feel bad about having to announce a second part of this. Okay, cool. Yeah, thank you guys for all the positive feedback here and the comments. Yes, and it shows you that you're not alone. Exactly. Wonderful. Time really went by like nothing. I can't believe it that we've already, that our time is up already. So thank you so much. Thank you for participating and contributing in this way. With the recording of this video, I'm going to send you an online self-test in regards to reading other people's emotions, and in regards to self-regulation. 2 tests, online tests. All right, and I want you to do these tests and let us know next time what you found out through these online tests. Awesome. Wonderful. See you soon. The time for the second part here will have to be announced. It will be outside of the July calendar. I'll add it. I have to check my calendar. Maybe I can do this next Friday here at the same time. Wonderful. Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.